Good morning, class. My name is Ghebriela. I will be presenting to you about effects of smoking abstinence on the subjective effects of caffeine, and we'll talk in detail more about like what people think and what my argument against them is. And before we get started, just want to tell you a story about how I got interested about this topic and how I started researching about it or found out about this. So one day at work, we were very slow. So with one of the doctors, we were talking, and he was telling me that how when a patient comes in, that they would and they had some serious problems and they didn't know and they had to figure it out. What they would do is this is back in the 80s, 90s, and they would take out a cigarette and smoke with them and be like, hey, let's do this, let's figure this out. So one day, one of his patients, he was he was a big smoker too. So he had to tell him to quit smoking, but it would be very hypocritical for a doctor to tell him. So they made a deal that they had to quit smoking together. So that's how he quit the smoking, and he went through some withdrawal issues and all that, which means the doctor. And he was telling me how the caffeine played in it and all that. So I will finish up the conversation at the end of the slide. So what I'm arguing against is people in the process of quitting smoking they don't need to change their caffeine intake, even though several investigators like hypothesized and did research and say that they should cut their caffeine in half and reduce it in order so that they don't have like the caffeine symptoms in them. But my argument is they shouldn't, and this is because this research that I did, it was done by a group of four people, which one was a PhD doctor. He had a PhD. He was a doctor and he had a PhD too. And the other one was a medical doctor who also worked in the psychiatric department at Oxford University. So what they did was they had a newspaper ad that displayed all these requirements. It said they had to be between 18 to 60 years old. They had to smoke greater than 10 cigarettes per day. They had to be using caffeine on a daily basis. And no way should they have any psychiatric or alcoholic drug abuse or problem, or not using any psychoactive medication or illicit drugs, and not attempting to change eating or exercising patterns, and no medical contraindication to use caffeine, or they can be pregnant or breastfeeding as well. So based on this, a lot of people applied and all that, and only 21 got accepted that really fit the requirements. And so what happened was, out of the 21, only 14 finished throughout the research practice because some of them either to withdrawal issues or they didn't follow through the rules, so they were disqualified. So the average mean of age was 42 with the standard deviation of 9, and their weight was 72 kg with standard deviation of 6, and they smoked on average 23 cigarettes per day. And the mean Fagerstern test for nicotine dependence score was 6.7, which was a very moderate dependence. And so based on that, they had their methods designed, and they referred to like about 19 to 20 research that were done before in order to design this. So it was very accurate. The research that they did wasn't just like boom like that. It was they referred to like so many other and then sat down and saw what their mistakes were and all that. So they came up with that and they designed it. So there was abstinence week and smoking week. So the ABABA is during the A week is the abstinence week, and during the B week was the smoking week. So they had 5 weeks that they tested. So participants during abstinence week, they couldn't have any caffeine, alcohol, or nicotine from Sunday 11 p.m. until the end of Thursday when the session was ended. And their testing session was every Tuesday and Thursday that they did. And during smoking week, no caffeine overnight prior to test session so that they can control the caffeine levels as well. And then during test sessions, the actual testing that they were doing, they couldn't be smoking at all. So they don't want people like to be sitting there for 4 hours or less or whatever. They don't want them to be having withdrawal symptoms. So during the smoking week, they made them smoke one cigarette right before the test session started so that they're completely effective, and the research went as accordingly. So here's the table. So this is the hours of deprivation from smoking, and this is the caffeine dose that they gave them. And during abstinence smoking, you can see they're divided into 5 weeks. So during the first week, you're abstained from smoking for 36 hours the first Tuesday when the session began. And they were given 200 milligrams, and then on that Thursday they were still like they couldn't smoke until that Thursday and session. So they were given another 200 milligram of caffeine dose, and to see like how they reacted. They recorded that, and on smoking day they did the same thing. They smoked, but they gave them the 400 milligram of caffeine to see how it changed, and then the 200 milligram how it changed with the previous week that was done. And then on the third week, they abstained them from smoking, and they didn't give them any caffeine to see like how the levels changed. And then on the fourth week, the first Tuesday, they didn't give them any. I mean, they let them smoke. I'm sorry, but they didn't give them any caffeine to see like if that changed too. And then on that Thursday, they didn't give them any changes. And then following week, they abstained them with the 400 milligram each. So as we can see, they had like the 200 with different scenarios, the 400 milligrams of caffeine, and the zero. So in the previous studies, what they found was maybe they were tested only for one and they didn't have any caffeine intake that was tested and all that. So they wanted to make sure that the different dose of caffeine levels were tested. And then based on the research that was done to average American people, they drink average caffeine intake in America actually is between, I think it was about 384 or 87 milligrams. So they wanted to make sure they were in between the ranges to see that they were giving the caffeine that they could be taking. So here are some of the withdrawal symptoms that smoking could cause. So based on these symptoms, this was part of the research that I just did this to give you guys an overview of what withdrawing from smoking is. Here's the results that they got. So abstaining from smoking, they, they saw the increase in anger, confusion, depression, tension, and hunger. And the p-values were very low, meaning that it was closer to 0 than to 1. So that meant that the error was very, very less likely, or the results had errors very less likely, was from the research that was designed. It was probably correct, accurate information. So for the caffeine, when they were taking caffeine, the only things that decreased was the headache, drowsiness, and fatigue. But the only relationship that was between smoking and the caffeine was the desire for cigarettes. That was the only thing that increased. And that once they corrected some errors that they had in the design or the research, the value was very meaningless. So what they made sure also was like the design was complete within participants' design, and there was wide range of abstinence during the abstinence duration and dose range. Like as I mentioned it before, there wasn't that many like things done, so they made sure they had different varieties. And then there was a wide range of subjective effects measures. There was a biochemical verification also used. Like so, each time if they weren't supposed to be smoking, they tested them for carbon monoxide level to see like if they were smoking or not, and to make sure that they weren't, and they were accurately following the rules so that there was less errors. And that's how some of them got disqualified too. So the conclusion they came up with was that changing caffeine intake during smoking cessation does not change withdrawal symptomatology. And this was also confirmed by a research done in 1994 by Swanson. And then the caffeine intake reduction can induce withdrawal symptoms of headache, fatigue, and drowsiness. And deprivation oneself of two reinforces is more difficult and less likely to be successful, and that's been studied and confirmed for like it's our human nature that we can't just quit two things at the same time. We need to quit one very bad habit, replace it with another good one, and then quit the other bad and replace it with a good. And so based on that, they came up with the conclusion that they shouldn't quit. And if you guys have any questions, I will take them at this time. Thank you so much for listening.